Thank you, Commissioner Bagger. Moving ahead, the next meeting is on the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management, which will be chaired by Vice Chairman Jeff Linford. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chair of the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management, excuse me for a second, James, I have two scripts here. Am I starting with the wrong script?
That's correct. If you go to the other one.
Okay. All right. Today's meeting, the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management is being held in public session in its entirety. At this point, I ask the Corporate Secretary to advise those present of the composition of the committee and any commissioner recusals on items at this time.
The Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management is composed of Vice Chairman Linford, the committee chair, Chairman O'Toole, the committee vice chair, Commissioners LaBarbera, Pacino, and Rosado. All committee members are present. In addition, Commissioners Bagger, Horwitz, and McCabe are also present. With respect to the item scheduled for discussion, there are no recusals required.
Thank you. The Chief Development Officer, Derek Utter, will now present an item to provide for the amendments to leases with Delta Airlines and JFK International Air Terminal LLC for the phased expansion and upgrade of Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Derek?
Thank you, Vice Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioners. You advance to the first slide. So we're here today to seek board authorization to finalize a lease amendment with JFK IAT, which is the operator of Terminal 4 at JFK, and Delta Airlines, which is the anchor tenant in Terminal 4, for a $1.5 billion expansion of Terminal 4. Now, this may seem a little bit like deja vu because we came to the board in February of 2020 to seek authorization for a larger $3.8 billion expansion, which was put on hold in light of COVID. This new project, which I'll go through in a little more detail momentarily, will allow Delta the opportunity to undertake the larger expansion in the future subject to certain constraints. But importantly, it's also worth noting that Delta's move from the existing Terminal 2 into Terminal 4 has been contemplated since 2010. So this has been a long-expected move for Delta.
Thank you, Derek. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just a little more detail on the comparison to what we discussed in February of 2020. The February 2020 plan contemplated a $3.8 billion investment that would build out 16 narrow-body gates on the Concourse A. It also had road frontage improvements and about $400 million investment in the existing facilities to upgrade them. The new plan is about 60% smaller in investment. It would build fewer gates at the end of the Concourse A, which I'll show in a moment, have a modified arrivals level curb, and will defer some of the road improvements into a future phase, and will advance $100 million of the $400 million of upgrades in this first phase. So this chart gives you a visual depiction of what the terminal looks like in gray today. On the left, you see a long Concourse B. On the right, a very short Concourse A, Terminal 4. The original plan was to build out Concourse A by 16 gates and to expand the head house. The new plan to the right shows a more modest increase in the head house, departures and arrivals area, and a more modest build out of Concourse A. So what would future phases of development allow? They would allow Delta to build up to 12 narrow-body gates inclusive of this first phase on Concourse A. They would also allow us to continue with the renovation of the existing facility by doing the additional $300 million of investment, and they would allow for further enhancements to road frontage. This project is being paid for entirely by private capital. IET will issue bonds, and Delta will pay the debt service on the Delta portion of the project, which is about $1.4 billion of the $1.5 billion. The debt service payments for the non-Delta portion will be repaid from other Terminal 4 revenues. Those are things like concessions and other rents from other non-Delta airlines. Community development has always been at the centerpiece of the overall JFK redevelopment program. Importantly, Delta and IAT are committing to support our robust community development agenda. We've had an active dialogue and close partnership with leaders in the community, and we want to make sure that we are a good neighbor and sharing the benefits of the program with those who live in surrounding neighborhoods. So importantly, they will commit to the 30% minority and women-owned business contracting goal. They will also commit to focusing on local Queens-based businesses, and they will help us in working with the community on local hiring and workforce development programs, educational programs, and other environmental initiatives. The timeline of the project is they would begin construction in the third quarter of this year, with the new gates I described earlier to open up at the end of 2022, and substantial completion of all the work is expected in 2023. And so just to conclude, again, what we're seeking the board today is to authorize us to enter into one or more agreements to effectuate this program. So with that, this concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Hearing no questions, I want to thank you, Derek. May I please have a motion from a committee member who's not recused on this matter to move?
So moved.
Will I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. This concludes today. The motion is passed, and this concludes today's meeting of the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management. And I turn it back to our chairman.